Hello, everyone. This is Nina Olson, the Executive Director for the Center for Taxpayer Rights, and we're back again with another tax chat in our series on transforming tax administration. And today's tax chat is a topic near and dear to all of us who work in the field of taxpayer rights, and that is basically low-income taxpayer clinics and volunteer income tax assistance programs, their present day state, and then, visions for the future. I'm going to turn this over right now to Susan Morgenstern, the senior attorney for the Center for Taxpayer Rights, and someone who most people know here, and she will be the host for today's program. So Susan, have fun.
All right. Thank you, Nina. Greetings, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many people attending today. We're talking about VITA, which is a topic near and dear to, I guess, this audience of amazing people, but also near and dear to my heart. So just a little bit of history. The Tax Reform Act of 1969 resulted in the formation of VITA. And VITA, as you know, provides free tax return preparation to low-income taxpayers, and the preparers are certified. IRS subsequently created SPEC, the Stakeholder Partnerships Education and Communication section, in 2000 to manage VITA, and also TCE, the Tax Counseling for the Elderly. There have been a number of studies done on the accuracy of VITA returns. As I was preparing for this today, I looked at the IRS data on the accuracy of on VITA itself. And there was this staggering statistic that showed that there's a 96% accuracy rate with VITA returns. So, I have goosebumps thinking about this. This past winter, there were approximately 7,300 locations hosting VITA, and these could be stationary sites, can also include some mobile sites. And IRS data show that VITA and TCE prepared more than 2.2 million returns with more than 57,000 volunteers in fiscal year 22. But the problem is that many taxpayers can't or don't access VITA, and others don't qualify for assistance, whether because they're ineligible due to their income level or due to their income source. Of the more than 136 million individual tax year 2022 returns filed as of the end of this past May, 69.8 million were filed by taxpayers whose adjusted gross income was less than $50,000, meaning that that population was likely eligible for VITA. Of those, more than 20 million included claims for the earned income tax credit. So we know we're talking about a pretty substantial VITA eligible population. And therein lies the challenge for VITA. And that challenge is how to reach the pool of VITA eligible taxpayers in order to provide the free, high quality tax return preparation that VITA is known for. So each of our 5 speakers will identify and address various challenges facing VITA, and each will offer suggestions for the path forward. So we have a lot of speakers today. We're going to start with Jon-Yin Chong, who's a legal intern at the Center for Taxpayer Rights this summer, and he's a rising 2L at Harvard Law School. Jon-Yin is a legal intern with us, and he has volunteered or worked for VITA sites in Alaska, California, upstate New York City, and Massachusetts. Jordyn Rogers, our second speaker, is with Rural Dynamics, a statewide nonprofit in Montana, where she's been for 7 years. This community-based organization works towards empowering everyone to access equitable economic opportunities. As the executive director, she oversees programs and develops partnerships that help individuals and families become financially secure. She has a background in organizational management, program evaluation, and professional writing. Being active in her community through volunteerism and advocacy is important for her. I have to say, Jordyn's the new kid on the block for us. She just became an LITC grantee as of July 1st. So welcome to the fold, Jordyn. Marshall Hunt is our third speaker. Marshall's located in Detroit. Marshall's a CPA who worked at the Accounting Aid Society there for close to 20 years. Now he's working with them as a certifying acceptance agent after retiring from full-time management with Accounting Aid in 2020. Marshall notes that this is his second retirement. His first was from the IRS, where he worked for 34 years as a revenue agent manager, and is a tax compliance researcher. Our fourth speaker is Cecile Blondet. She's from San Juan, Puerto Rico. She's the executive director of Espacios Abiertos, a nonprofit organization that through fiscal analysis, strategic litigation, and civic engagement works to promote a more transparent, participatory, accountable democratic society in Puerto Rico with increased justice and equity for low and middle income families of the island. She's a licensed but non-practicing attorney with experience in the field of public communications. Our final speaker is Caleb Smith, a clinical professor of law at the University of Minnesota Tax Clinic and director of the Ronald M. Mankoff Tax Clinic. Prior to law school, Caleb worked for 3 years at a VITA organization in Minnesota, and he's volunteered with VITA for over a decade at sites in Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Oregon. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jon-Yin to get our conversation started.
Thanks so much, Susan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start off my presentation. First I need to share my slides. So I'll make sure to do that first. Okay. Looks like it's up. So I'm going to start my presentation by sharing a little bit about my origins in low-income tax advocacy. On its face, this might seem a little indulgent, but I'm going to ask you guys to give me the benefit of the doubt. I promise that there's a point to this story. The first time I was certified as a VITA preparer was for the 2017 tax season. That year, Professor Caleb Smith, then a fellow at Harvard Law School's Federal Tax Clinic, offered to join a spring break service trip to provide legal services to migrant communities in California's Central Valley. This was for Cornell Law School. Here is a picture of the trip, which I did not tell Caleb ahead of time that I was including. Caleb's presence allowed me and a few other accounting students at Cornell to tag along with the law school to provide free tax prep. On that trip, I saw what it was like to assist people that face a lot of barriers to accessing services. The unavailability of resources in languages other than English, device poverty, lack of access to transportation, and geographic gaps to access areas, rural areas, all made it harder for many migrants to avail themselves of programs like VITA. My participation on that trip kicked off my interest in law and low-income tax advocacy. Since then, I've prepared or reviewed thousands of returns and claimed millions in refunds and EIPs for clients, though that wasn't particularly hard to do over the past few years, as I'm sure more than a few people on this call know, the pandemic kept us all pretty busy. I'm sharing this story with you all because by traditional VITA metrics, what Caleb, I, and my two buddies did in California wasn't particularly impressive. We operated 3 mobile sites over a few weekdays and saw maybe a handful of clients. But the impact of that trip goes past the number of returns prepared or refunds claimed. Migrant workers looking to comply with the US tax system are no less deserving of competent tax preparation through VITA than any other client. But as anyone knows who's worked with someone who doesn't speak English or doesn't speak it as their native language, working through a translator and with someone who might be unfamiliar with the US tax system can be much more time consuming than just working with a regular VITA client, like through the return. That extra investment in serving a more vulnerable client is harder to quantify into a metric that could be used as a standard for VITA success. Another area where it's difficult to measure the downstream impact of VITA participation is with students. In addition to inspiring me to pursue a career in tax, this trip was also an inspiration for Marquise Riley, the gentleman on the left-hand side of that photograph. After working for 3 to 4 years for Ernst & Young, Marquise went back to Cornell, became a professor of practice in accounting, also became a certifying acceptance agent, and now runs Cornell University's VITA site. Giving students a chance to participate in more robust and challenging VITA experiences, letting them see how crucial the service can be for marginalized people, leads to VITA reinvestment by volunteers like Marquise and me. But as is the case with taking on a comparatively harder return for a migrant worker, the returns on investment in a more robust preparer or quality reviewer experience is pretty difficult to quantify, or even harder to predict. I'm guessing that a lot of people on this call like numbers. I like numbers too. It's nice to have something concrete to anchor your decision making. But if we're looking to make VITA better, I believe we need to get a little bit more creative and maybe a little uncomfortable. If this program is to grow, we need to find new measures for how we determine success. During this tax chat, my fellow panelists and I are going to highlight several free tax prep initiatives or programs that go above and beyond in providing advocacy and services for their clients. I'll start by giving an overview of two of the most impressive VITA sites I've been able to work at. These are Urban Upbound in New York City and Alaska Business Development Center based out of Anchorage, Alaska. This is a picture of the Queensbridge houses, more commonly known as Queensbridge, which is a public housing development in New York City. It accommodates approximately 7,000 people in two separate complexes of 29 buildings. Queensbridge is the largest public housing complex in North America. Urban Upbound is a nonprofit that works in the area. It was co-founded by a lifelong resident of Queensbridge with the intention to develop high-quality services that address resident-identified needs. They provide underserved youth and adults with the tools and resources to achieve economic prosperity and self-sufficiency through 6 integrated programs, each of which has like several sub-programs. It's all really impressive. They have employment services, college access and youth development, financial counseling and affordable housing, community revitalization through business innovation, financial inclusion services anchored by their own federal credit union, and of course, tax preparation and income support, which holds the Urban Upbound VITA program. Their primary VITA site is located literally across the street from Queensbridge. Urban Upbound does things a little bit differently than the typical VITA site to better serve their community. They have expanded language services, custom 13614C intakes, and native language speakers for clients with limited English proficiency. When I was working there in 2020, my colleagues spoke French, Haitian Creole, Spanish, Hungarian, Russian, Portuguese, Japanese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Hindi, and Arabic, and I'm probably missing a few other languages. There were custom 13614C intakes in Chinese, but not just simplified Chinese. They also had traditional Chinese. It's just amazing the amount of resources that this one site has. A lot of it was possible because Urban Upbound actually pays most of their tax preparers and quality reviewers. While there are still unpaid volunteers like retirees or students, paid staff are preparing and reviewing most of the returns. I thought this was really great because it built up word of mouth, especially in migrant communities, which can be harder to reach by conventional English language outreach. For example, I became friends with an Egyptian mother preparer and reviewer who ended up bringing both of her college-age sons to the site to have their returns done. Paying new tax preparers to do VITA also provided economic mobility to a lot of people who wouldn't be able to do an entry-level job. Many lower income and entry-level jobs in New York City are physically demanding. Positions at Urban Upbound gave entry-level opportunities to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to work. The other really big thing that sets Urban Upbound apart in my mind was how well woven they were into the fabric of the community. If the site wasn't too busy, you could walk in and not just get your tax returns done, you could also sign up for SNAP. And at the end of your tax return prep, if you didn't have a bank account for direct deposit, you could literally walk outside of the site, walk 3 doors down, and just walk into their federal credit union to get an account. Finally, they weren't just active in Queensbridge, they were also active across New York City. When I was at Urban Upbound, they operated more than 20 mobile sites across the Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. Some of these were in public libraries, others were in New York City council members' offices. I've had the opportunity to work and partner, volunteer at 7 different VITAs. Urban Upbound is second to none when it comes to forming partnerships with other agencies and organizations. They're an extraordinary example of what you can achieve with teamwork, community buy-in, and most importantly, time. So my second example of a perspective shifting VITA is Alaska Business Development Center, or ABDC. ABDC is an Anchorage-based nonprofit that provides business consulting services, or has provided business consulting services to rural Alaska for more than 4 decades. Their VITA program is run through their volunteer tax and loan program, which has been operating for over 25 years. ABDC's impact is impossible to fully capture by conventional metrics, as most of the clients they work with are significantly harder to serve than the average VITA client. When I said on the last slide that they brought tax service directly to Alaska communities, I meant it quite literally. Most of the communities ABDC serves are small indigenous communities in isolated pockets of rural Alaska. These communities are not connected to Anchorage by road. The only way in and out during the Alaska winter, which happens to coincide with tax season, is by bush plane. With only a few dozen or several hundred people in each of these communities, there's not the economy of scale necessary to support a local tax preparer. Additionally, in rural Alaska, there's often limits to internet access. Data plans are not unlimited as they are in the lower 48. Instead, your internet plan might be charged by megabyte or might be quoted by your community leadership. One of the places that I visited in March didn't have cell phone service after Verizon discontinued 3G. Many of the returns that ABDC prepares are more complex than the average VITA return. There are more instances of multi-generational households and higher rates of self-employment in indigenous Alaskan communities. Many Native Alaskans participate in the commercial fishing industry and are correctly categorized as independent contractors. Finally, most of the communities that ABDC serves, as I mentioned before, are majority indigenous. And this population is still recovering from decades of cultural suppression. To serve these communities, ABDC recruits volunteers from both Alaska and the lower 48. Volunteers who go up to Anchorage from the lower 48 each spend a week flying between 2 and 4 different indigenous communities, working sometimes 12-hour days to serve as that community's tax preparer for the year. Each of the red dots on this map is one of the approximately 75 communities served by ABDC. Even with this map, ABDC's reach can be a little hard to imagine, as Alaska is disconnected from the rest of the lower 48. So I've included another map on the next slide to illustrate just how logistically impressive this is. Taken together with this map and the previous map, it's hard not to marvel at this one VITA site's geographic coverage, right? Comparing these two maps, ABDC's easternmost VITA site is in the equivalent of Georgia, while its westernmost mobile VITA site is in New Mexico. To give you a sense of just how isolated these communities are, this is an aerial picture I took of Good News Bay, an Alaskan indigenous community of approximately 240 people. The ice on the lower third of that picture is a frozen part of the Bering Sea. And to give you another perspective, here's a picture from the ground of Unalaska, a community out in the Aleutian Islands. Like Urban Upbound, ABDC has to do things a little bit differently to best serve their clients. Their volunteers are required to complete approximately 20 additional hours of extra training, in addition to being VITA Advanced certified. This includes a pre-trip webinar, 14+ specific Alaska tax returns, 6 quizzes, plus more exercises. Volunteers also need to attend an in-person training in Anchorage, as well as cultural competency training. ABDC is also home to Alaska's only LITC. VITA clients who find themselves in tax controversy can easily access tax representation without an out-of-organization referral. Like Urban Upbound, ABDC also has a network of partnerships that they leverage to provide free lodging for their volunteers while out in the communities. It's really an example, or this site is just really an example of what you can achieve if you're willing to, I think, get creative and dream big. Caleb introduced me to this world, but ABDC really helped me find my place on it. Having to complete such rigorous training helped me grow up fast in VITA. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to end the share and pass it back to Jordyn.
All right. Thank you, Jon-Yin. And now taking us to another vast state is in the lower 48 is Jordyn Rogers from Montana. So thank you, Jordyn.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel familiar with a lot of the challenges that you outlined for ABDC. So that's very interesting to hear about. And I would love to connect with them more sometime if you have their contact information. So the organization that I'm the executive director of is Rural Dynamics Financial Wellness. And we have several programs that focus on economic opportunities here in Montana. And Tax Help Montana is our largest program out of the ones that we offer. We serve around 6,000 to 7,000 households here in Montana with either VITA or TCE. And we're hopefully building that out with LITC soon. So we do serve the whole state of Montana and also the Nez Perce reservation in Idaho, and have a really great partnership with them. So technically we're considered multi-state program, but we don't do it alone. We have over 100 certified volunteers every year that continue to come back or are new. I like hearing about people's origin story with getting involved with VITA and TCE, and mine comes from the AmeriCorps program. We had AmeriCorps volunteers talking about VITA, and opened up this whole new world for me, volunteering first for VITA and now managing a VITA program. Has been quite a journey, but that's how I started, was with AmeriCorps volunteerism, and that's what we continue to use here at Rural Dynamics. So with our VITA services, we originally started because we had a few retired CPA and accounting students that partnered up, and we were really passionate as an organization for getting the state EITC passed here. And I was lucky enough to be hired about a year before we had it signed by the Montana governor to introduce that to Montana. So that was a huge success in our VITA program. And one of our, I guess I would say, more exciting things that led to building out Tax Help Montana. It is naturally an older state here in Montana. We serve around 45% of those we serve are considered elderly, 60 years or older. So it made sense to go into the TCE world because many of our sites were already senior and community centers. So we built out more of our services to cater to the TCE program. And we became a trusted representation, a trusted partner for a lot of our clients that have received IRS letters throughout the years or after they just filed with us, whether it's from the IRS or the Department of Revenue with our state. So we thought it made sense to go into the LITC world as already being that trusted partner. And we are lucky enough to work with a lot of great English second language speaking and ESL teachers and educators, then translators that work with us already at a lot of our tax sites, but want to partner with building out our education piece. So we're joining that pilot program to provide educational and workshop development for reaching the target audience of the LITC pilot. some barriers to serving in Montana. Again, it's very similar to ABDC, but we have not even just a rural state, but technically we call it the frontier. That's what we're serving is, you know, a lot of communities that don't have broadband, don't have internet. Really, the only way to reach them is in person. And so traveling is huge. And it's also during the coldest part of the year here. We've often had teams that in sites that we've had to shut down a pop-up site because they're trapped in a blizzard 2 hours away. So I think the largest ground that we cover, we've been in 127 counties in Montana. That is the most counties we've ever served in a tax year. And that kind of dropped off, of course, during COVID, like many other sites in the country. We had to adopt to a virtual only or drop off and pick up only model. And we've gotten better at making a hybrid out of that as the years continue. But we definitely saw an uptick of in-person and wanting that face-to-face interaction in Montana is very huge. You know, they don't trust people over the phone or people virtually as much as the face-to-face connection in Montana still. So we try to find a good balance of offering all three, and that can be challenging with recruiting volunteers. That's something that we would like to see built out more in VITA and change, is building up that more formal incentives. We like with TCE that they get stipends and we can pay volunteers for their time, and finding a way to do that for VITA would be really great for us. We just need a lot of human capital to cover the state. Traveling is not always the best option for us. And we have noticed that, you know, our sites do well if they're ran by people in their communities, people that they know and already trust and have, you know, that familiar relationship with. So we really like to provide the technical support and the reporting support. And if they can go out in their community and serve who they need to serve, that's when it's a win-win situation for everyone around. So that is the model that we are trying to rebuild up from, you know, pre-pandemic years. Another thing we're really proud of is partnering with our Indigenous communities here in Montana. We really strategically work with all of the 7 reservations and Nez Perce. We partner a few of our sub-grant awards. 3 of them are with Native and tribal colleges in Montana. So again, they really do their thing. They know exactly who they need to reach and how to do it. And we let them lead their site and only, provide that technical assistance when they need it. So that is our main priority, is just building up our sub-sites to be autonomous and serve in the way that they already do for so many other things that they offer, but providing that awesome VITA service as well. And that's all I have, Susan. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jordyn. It's interesting, you face many of the same, as you noted, you face many of the same challenges as the folks in Alaska, both in terms of cultural issues, as well as geography, and I assume weather as well. So thank you for sharing that. Moving further east, we're going to Detroit, to Marshall at Accounting Aid Society.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate Jordyn's remarks about wanting to expand beyond VITA. Accounting Aid has had an LITC and VITA program for a number of years. I've been involved with VITA myself since 1981 and have been the authorized representative for our certifying acceptance agency agreement since 2011. Many VITA volunteers have never seen an ITIN. And a number of years ago, I happened to work one day at a site in Southwest Detroit with a large Spanish-speaking population, and I noticed some of the taxpayers had a 9 in front of their number and they couldn't get the EITC. Well, the welcoming nature of that center and the desire to serve taxpayers who are undocumented really hit me, and I took an interest into it. So I decided to become a CAA with the agency after that. I've been really enjoyed the appreciation and gratitude that those taxpayers share. All VITA, I'd say most VITA clients, taxpayers we serve are very appreciative, but I see just a lot of appreciation from the undocumented that we bring into the tax system. It's very rewarding. It's allowed me to meet new people. I'm on the City of Detroit Immigration Task Force, and I've just enjoyed getting out into the community. Almost all of the ITINs I prepare are for undocumented taxpayers. Not all ITINs are issued to undocumented taxpayers, but most of what I do are undocumented. Fortunately, we have a Mexican consulate here in Detroit, and many of the taxpayers I serve are from Mexico. It works out very well. They're good at issuing passports, certified copies as needed, and especially important for taxpayers who can't get a driver's license in our state. It's very important to get the services. We serve, most of my ITIN work is done in Southwest Detroit and another community up north of Detroit, Pontiac. I have always appreciated the opportunity to bring taxpayers into the tax system and get them the benefits of e-filing after the initial paper return that has to go in with the ITIN application, the Form W-7. Contrary to some public opinion, many undocumented taxpayers do pay taxes. They pay income taxes, and absent that, they pay sales and property taxes in many cases. Wanting to bring people into the system, though, I do recognize there is always a possible risk of exposure for taxpayers that have been paid in cash and have no connection with the IRS or other federal agencies at sometimes. And they're also paying into the Social Security system, and likely they'll never get the benefit of that unless we get some action from Congress. Now, legislative action is not always likely in some cases. I'm proud to state, though, that the Michigan governor just signed a bill that eliminates our criminal penalties on cohabitation in Michigan, a statute that's been on the books for 92 years and prevented some unmarried partners in relationships from claiming the other. After not getting a committee hearing for years, a number of years, it finally went through quickly this year. Okay. IRS, I believe, has done a pretty good job of making it easier for VITA programs to serve as certifying acceptance agents. There's a great publication for all VITA programs to take a look at, publication 5428. What that does is outline the special procedures available for VITA programs that want to offer CAA services. Fingerprint cards are not required for authorized representatives who are not credentialed. And the forensic training, which normally has to be taken from a commercial provider, is offered free through the IRS. So those are two real positives. While LITCs can't advertise that they do ITIN work, and they're very limited in what they can do, the IRS does post a list of VITA programs that offer CAA services. There's 36 programs listed, programs and sites from 6 states. Not always the easiest list to find, but if you go in under ITIN, it is there. Or, you have to go in under VITA to find it, not under ITIN. For CAAs, a real plus is there's a hotline at Austin. I haven't had to use it much because you normally use it if there's a problem, but it's the one number I can call IRS that either somebody will answer or will return a call quickly. I've had very good experience with them. A big concern that I have, and probably other programs and CAAs do, is that there's currently a moratorium on applying for new to become new CAAs or renewals. Our agreement ends at the end of this year. It's a 4-year agreement. One reason I stayed, I basically retired from all of my management work at Accounting Aid back in 2020, but we had a couple of years left on this agreement. And I really enjoy the work. So I wanted to stay and give me time to train a couple of new younger individuals to take my place. And I've done that, but we're waiting on the moratorium to end. Normally, IRS has always said it takes 120 days to process an application to become or renew a CAA status. Well, we're getting close now. Now, under the new system they're putting in, they say it'll be weeks instead of months for a renewal, but I'm getting a little nervous. We're getting close to the end of our agreement and definitely want us to continue with that. For smaller programs, sometimes becoming a CAA can be an issue. They need to be open year-round, and that can be overcome, I would think. The main reason there is they want people with ITIN issues, especially on ones that were issued, to be able to come back for assistance. Also, the representative must be an employee, a permanent type employee, and that can be a problem. Now, the VITA grant might, and I just say might because I don't know for sure, might fund the CAA position. VITA grant lists certain positions that can be funded. They say others can be with approval. Interestingly, I learned that my part-time position now as a CAA is not funded by our VITA grant, but they've got an inquiry into the VITA program office to see if they can do that in the future. Also, you have to do 5 a year or you'll be suspended, and that can be an issue year to year. We do enough that I don't have to worry about that, but I know a commercial CAA who got suspended. He was doing a great job. All of a sudden his work dried up and had a problem. Okay, I want to discuss a couple of issues. Some of these were likely discussed on the tax chat last week. I've seen some notes from that. Processing time is taking me 9 to 11 weeks to get a application back. Before COVID, it was taking 3 to 4 weeks, much more manageable, much more acceptable for the clients. Because of the restriction on claiming certain credits, if you don't have a timely ITIN application in before the due date, I always try to get an extension if there's any credits available. Now, what you do there is you file an extension, indicate ITIN to be requested, where it calls for a Social Security or ITIN number. How they ever match those, I don't know, but I send them all certified so I can prove I did it, hopefully. Exemptions for dependents can be an issue if there's no federal credit involved. Then you want to, then you can't really get a ITIN for a dependent to be claimed who lives in Canada or Mexico. That can affect your state or city filings. Credits are not allowed on prior year returns. If Congress wanted to limit prior year filings, that's probably the best way to do it, eliminate these credits and cause a person to owe thousands of dollars in tax on a prior year return after they've gotten the ITIN. First year of, I'll wrap up pretty soon here. First year of residency is an issue. Many of the clients I see have been here for a number of years, but if they just came last year, VITA cannot do a dual status return. That's one issue. And then for married taxpayers wanting to elect to file a joint return to report their worldwide income, the return itself is in scope for VITA, but the fairly simple election statement is not in scope for VITA. I'm not intending to be the scope police, and I want to always look for practical ways to resolve issues, but I do recognize the need for scope. VITA volunteers want to help everybody they can find typically, and you got to put some limits on what they can do based on their training and experience. And sometimes I'm grateful for a VITA scope limit. I'm not going to talk much more about scope, except I've always suggested that we ought to have a VITA scope summit where partners in the field, IRS can get together and see what makes sense. I mentioned that VITA cannot prepare the joint return election, but by contrast, VITA can look at a business taxpayer, determine that they have an accounting practice or policy in place to expense tangible personal property, and prepare and file an election, a safe harbor, de minimis safe harbor election to expense property up to $2,500. That's really all I want to say about scope. But I think if VITA wants to serve a taxpayer well, a type of business, they should be trained, even with outside training developed by partners, to do all of the issues related to that business. Business use of home for daycare providers. Not teaching anywhere that you have, when you claim the standard mileage rate, you have a basis reduction amount, which could affect you when the vehicle is traded in or sold. Anyway, that's my pitch on scope. I am retired from management, so my views are my own and not necessarily those of the agency, but I appreciate the few minutes I had here to talk about CAAs and a few other things. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Marshall. I mean, I think that's a really interesting perspective. And when we think about VITA, I think our minds leap to preparing the 1040, and we don't think about necessarily the ancillary issues and the importance of how we bring people into compliance and giving them the tools to become compliant. So the CAA facet of your organization, I think, is really important in that regard. So thank you for that. Moving like way south, we're going to turn to Cecile, who's in Puerto Rico, talking about Espacios Abiertos and the work that organization has done in Puerto Rico. So Cecile.
Thank you so much, Susan. Let me see if I can start sharing my screen. Got it. Yes. So I run an organization that does not, it's not a VITA grantee. We do not receive money from the government because we precisely want to make government accountable for their decisions and their processes. So you probably are thinking, why would a fiscal policy and advocacy analysis organization do some prep filing? And the answer is that in 2022, we were presented with the opportunity to prove a concept. We've been working a lot on EITC analysis and the importance for the EITC for Puerto Rico. We do not have federal EITC. So those are a few facts that I want to share with you. What is the situation in Puerto Rico and what we did differently and how it turned out. So thank you so much for this opportunity. So in terms of facts, we do not have federal EITC, but the American Rescue Plan actually assigned $600 million in federal dollars to complement the local EITC that we've been working with here in Puerto Rico. That's important because the poverty rate in Puerto Rico is greater than those of the poorest states in the United States. Nonetheless, still the federal contribution continues to be lower in that sense. At the same time, there was another organization working on child tax credit in Puerto Rico. That's the Institute of Youth Development. And we did have the child tax credit, the federal child tax credit in Puerto Rico, but it was only for families of 3 children or more. And that also changed with the American American Rescue Plan, finally that loophole in the law that had been avoiding the credit to help many needy families in Puerto Rico, was fixed. And beginning in 2022, that now families with 1, 2, or 3 children are entitled to participate in the child tax credit. That's important because when you consider that 44% of the population of the island lives under poverty level, that's huge. 1.4 million people live here on the poverty level. That's more than the population of 12 states each, separate in the United States. So it's huge. Yin Young was showing the map of Alaska before in terms of the map of the United States. But when you consider also this in terms of we might be small, but the need is great. And if you consider that 57% of the children living here live in poverty, that even makes it worse. So we estimated that with the American Rescue Plan, the local EITC and the federal EITC, plus the child tax credit, there could be an impact of over $2 billion that will go to the pockets of the people of the island. So that was very important. But the experience that we had with the local EITC here was that only out of the 200 million that was allocated by government, only half of it, or less than half, 43 and 46% in the previous years were take up. And the American Rescue Plan for the EITC for the 600 million to kick in, we needed to spend the 200 million before. So we were really scared that that would not happen, and that the possible impact will actually, fall through the cracks. So we joined forces with the other organization who was working on the child tax credit, and we were working on the EITC, and we joined forces also with the Hispanic Federation, and we created what we call the Alliance for Economic Security in Puerto Rico. We were each doing separate campaigns at the time, and we figured we're catering to the same people. Why don't we join forces and we make sure that people go to one place to shop for all of the credits? So this was January of 2022. VITA grants were done. We had no opportunity to do that through VITA. So we set up to raise $2 million. We raised 1.6 that went directly to tax prep and to an awareness campaign. And then the other part went to some analysis. We did that through different foundations in the United States that help us. So the goals was to deliver a media campaign that will make every resident who qualified for either one of the credits aware of these credits. This was important because many people here, the people who are going to benefit the most, actually for years, we've been telling them you do not need to file taxes, because if you fall within the range of under $20,000 per year, please do not send your papers to the local Treasury Department. We don't want your papers because you're not going to be able to pay any taxes, so do not file. But precisely those were the people who were going to benefit the most, and the people that we needed to change that narrative that they had been taught for many years. So we did not want to compete with what was happening. So we wanted to complement what the federal government was doing and the local government were doing in terms of pre-filing, but we wanted to take them to the communities. We also wanted to encourage public and private employers to first help their own employees, and then provide support for the rest of the community. And also we needed to be strategic in terms of how we're going to deliver this information and services. So we started this media campaign. In terms of production and media buy, was almost $900,000. In terms of non-paid value, it was over $250,000. The campaign featured storytelling through local action. It was very catchy, singing, like a sing-along kind of thing. We used local talent, original music, and scores. We did 3 versions of TV spots, 5 versions of radio spots that will tell a story, different story, like a grandfather with the kids or an immigrant, etc. Of course, we went to print media. We had lots of full color, full page ads in the general circulation papers and weekly regional papers. We printed oversized flyers that were delivered through the newspapers, hand delivered in traffic lights weekly. Billboards everywhere, digital banners, takeovers, social media. The media campaign resulted in a lot of reach. It was over millions that people saw the campaign. We also created a website, which was called Reclama tu Dinero, Claim Your Money, Reclama tu Dinero Puerto Rico, PR.com. It had over, well, you can see 700,000 page views, unique views were over 500,000. That was the traffic between the 3 websites that we had. We complemented this with the live hotline from United Way of Puerto Rico, which also received lots of calls to help people with CTC and EITC. And other support that was very important was that Unidos US established weekly, and then eventually they were bi-weekly calls with the federal government, with the White House, and local allies. And it was through those calls that we were able to figure out a lot and resolve a lot of the issues that came through. So for 9 months, we did these calls, and those calls actually helped when the instructions were in Spanish. The worksheet that for the CTC, for example, had the instructions of the previous to the American Rescue Plan. So the first question in the worksheet was like, if you do you have 3 kids? If you do not have 3 kids, then you cannot continue. So there were a lot of barriers that we encountered just by us, doing the work that people were supposed to be doing by themselves. So we focus a lot on capacity building, multi-sector awareness and trainings. We did over 30 workshops, and a lot of individuals were trained, but we also went to district legislatures, to the municipalities, Head Start teachers, etc., etc. We also cater to the employees, to the private sector employees. So we had the largest banks sent out newsletters. The Association of Human Resource Professionals also helped us out. We developed toolkits and materials for them as well. We created a map of economic impact where you could see your municipality, what was the impact in terms of money, in terms of for the local economy, a calculator, EITC, CTC, toolkits for other NGOs, for employers, for government agencies. We also developed graphic designs. I think a lot of this is you're probably familiar with many of these things. We did the instructional videos for CTC, ITC. We did that with an NGO that works, that's part of the Certified Public Accountants Association. And at the end, we had events throughout the island, around 27 to 30 events around the island, which also turned out to, we did it through 8 community-based organizations throughout the island. 70 of the 78 municipalities were impacted. These are a few of them. So we actually took, instead of like bringing people to a center, we took a center to the people, to the communities. That's essentially what we did. And then in terms of the EITC, when previous years we used to had 100 million, it was over $1 billion that actually the Treasury Department, the local Treasury Department was able to reimburse. In terms of child tax credit, it was also over $1 billion. So altogether, it was over 2 billion, very close to what we estimated. In terms of returns and refunds, there's the number of returns and then the refunds. And I think one of the most important things for us, it's the impact that it had on poverty, the reduction of poverty, particularly when you think that what we saw on year 2022 was more than what actually you will see or would have seen over a decade in Puerto Rico. That's in terms of EITC. And then in terms of CTC as well, it was really, the impact was incredible. And in terms of strategies and learnings, I think for us, the use of data was important. It was key for strategic impact. You have to think that Puerto Rico was also coming. I mean, we've had a fiscal crisis starting in 2016, the disaster of Hurricanes Irma and Hurricane Maria. Then we had the earthquakes January in 2020, the COVID pandemic. So there was a lot of stress, the economic stress on people's pockets. The combined efforts produce better results. You know, the combination of the alliance for us, that was key. Attention to details, you know, putting ourselves in the shoes of the other. The timely access to government official, locally and federal, that was key also to solving problems. What we tried to do throughout was to make sure that we were speaking to public in different frequencies. I think people get their information differently. People act differently. So if you only use one frequency, you will only be reaching out to the people on that frequency. When you use multiple frequencies to speak to people, to communicate with people, then you make sure that at least either you double or at least you identify people who are out of the radar. So what we did pretty much was we did like VITA-like services. We took that to rural communities. For us, it was important that the information was delivered through trusting agents, through their community leaders, not a government official. We also believe that doing two things at once was more efficient. So people will go to one place to get their EITC and CTC. It was more efficiently. In terms of a faster, we also know from analysis that if the CTC, the local CTC, the federal CTC was done through the local Treasury Department, it would have delivered 500 million faster to people. They ended up getting that money in October, November, and December. They could have had that money in May had the federal government worked with the local Treasury Department in Puerto Rico. That's one of our suggestions moving forward. Also, the awareness and sense of urgency for filing early. Many times we keep telling people, oh, you can still file in 1-2 more years. But now I think the idea of making sure that everybody should file at a certain date, that the urgency actually help. As mentioned before, amplifying and complementing government services, and most of all, strengthening and fostering the civic capacities, because we believe this is an ongoing effort that is very welcome by the community-based organizations. And lastly, one of the things is like financial resources or scarce, but very needed. In our case, we use the foundation money to promote the campaign and to deliver the services that we actually paid for. I mean, we paid for the public accountants, we paid for lunches, we paid for all kinds of other expenses to set up the different centers throughout the island. So that's the Reclama tu Dinero. This is something that we're thinking of that is not only about CTC and EATC and other tax credits and refunds, but it's also a campaign that has to do with the inequality of the people of Puerto Rico in terms of access to federal programs and federal benefits on the island. There's over 3 million US citizens who live on this island, and unfortunately, we do not have representation in Congress. So everything is a little bit more difficult for us to get through. So I really appreciate the opportunity to bring a few facts about Puerto Rico and our experience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Cecile. I mean, it sounds like you've done this tremendous outreach campaign and probably talked to just about every resident on the island. But one of the things I think about as I think about all this amazing tax preparation work that's going on, the education work that's going on and so forth, is sometimes people end up, instead of getting their refund, they get a notice from the IRS. And it's terrifying to get that notice from the IRS. And, you know, we have to think about, well, what do we do about that? How do we educate taxpayers about where they can go for assistance? And so here to answer that question is Caleb Smith.
Hello, everyone. So I am going to kind of take a step, maybe a little bit back from what everybody's been talking about and go into kind of broad picture of what I see as the current state of VITA. So this isn't really VITA organizations, it's just VITA, the program. Also talk about Low Income Taxpayer Clinics, their integration with VITA, what I see as kind of the future state of VITA or my ideal future state. And then also I'd like to have some concrete steps of how to get there. And I really do encourage and welcome anybody with their own comments. This is obviously just my own thoughts on it. I was told to treat this kind of as like a conversation over coffee. So I don't have the very well done slides that other people have. A picture of me from 6 years ago, notwithstanding, but the rest of them. Really, it's going to be kind of free flowing. And I really do encourage comments as they come up, because it is, to some extent, me editorializing after 10 plus years of doing VITA, also still, you know, being at a low income taxpayer clinic. And, you know, just to give a little kind of background on my genesis story of why this matters to me and why it's been an ongoing thing, VITA and LITCs and how they can integrate. So I began by working at a VITA organization at a time when I didn't really care or know anything about how taxes worked. I'd just come out of undergrad. I'd worked at AmeriCorps for a year. This is when the financial collapse of 2007 happened. Getting a job period after that was somewhat of an uphill battle. There was a position at a VITA organization recruiting volunteers. They said you didn't have to know about taxes, you just have to recruit people. I jumped at it, I got it. I found that surprisingly, taxes were very interesting to me. And that's actually something that I've come across a lot as a professor. I benefit tremendously from the very, very low expectations that people have of tax. So I teach federal tax procedure, which if you were to put together 3 words to try to just come up with the most boring possible topic, I think federal tax procedure would probably be high up on the list. Got procedure, federal tax. None of that really jumps out, but students end up taking it, some because they have to at the clinic, but others just because they want to. And what I've found I really benefit from, and what I've seen across the board, is people find that tax is a lot more interesting, a lot less dry once they actually get into it. So it's a lot more public interest people I've found get into tax if only they're exposed to it. That's something that's really struck me. So when I started at VITA, I was philosophy undergrad, again, very far from tax. But I found the tax aspect really fascinating and decided I wanted to go to law school to do something more with it, because I felt, frankly, from what I'd seen, that low-income tax issues were not very well developed in the law. And this is, again, something I've seen, so I'm kind of putting it out there. A lot of people that are interested in public interest law or just low-income issues, in my opinion, they tend to go towards fields that are not tax. So I think you get a lot of, you know, very passionate, intelligent people that are interested in public interest, and they don't think tax first. So they go into civil rights and other things that are obviously very important. But I do think that the more you're exposed to tax, the more you see its interplay with everything. So I've thought a lot about what more can we do within VITA. That was my background from the kind of LITC tax law side that I now occupy a bit more. And what I've seen as kind of the current state of VITA, what I've seen as its genesis, is it kind of moved, in my opinion. So Susan mentioned it began more or less in 1969. Very different program back then. My understanding is some of it had to do with actually the IRS getting rid of Form 1040A at some point, and there's a concern about, oh, now we can't do a slightly, easy return. Back, my understanding, and a lot of organizations I think track this with how they've grown. For a long period of time, the mission of VITA was basically taxes are hard, let us help you do them, which makes sense. I think it's true. The mission statement at the nonprofit I worked at long ago, when it was called something different, was along the lines of everybody should have, access to quality tax preparation. I think over time, and particularly in the 90s, what has happened and what will get us to this current state is what the tax system does is exploded into public interest and public benefit delivery, especially with the earned income tax credit. I don't really think you can talk about VITA and its changes over time without linking it to just how much larger the earned income tax credit has gotten. And you see that, I think, with what organizations do, but also with what VITA focuses on. So it kind of shifted, in my opinion, from let us help you with tricky tax returns, which still people want to do, to let us maximize your refunds with the EITC. And let's focus heavily on earned income tax returns. That's largely, I think, what the income guidelines actually deal with. So what would I, or how would I kind of describe the current state of VITA? And again, this isn't really organizations. This is just what I see the program is focusing on. I think it focuses on helping a lot of people with a lot of refunds. Jon-Yin talked a little bit about how when we were on our service trip, the numbers of people we helped weren't particularly huge, but if you're not just looking at it a numbers game, so to speak, the impact for those individuals might have been very large, and there might have been a good return on investment. Honestly, sometimes just with consultations, you might not even do a return, but it's helping people in the community. What I have seen a lot of, and some of the complaints, frankly, I've heard from VITA organizations, is it's always, let's do more returns. It is kind of the push. As an LITC that's also on a federal grant, I sometimes relate with that with let's help more people, just as many things as we possibly can, but I will not go into that rant. So it's been a focus on a lot of clients and a lot of refunds. And I think how to get there, VITA has kind of narrowed what its training is on and its expertise to make it really great at teaching on, in my opinion, filing status and dependency issues, and then the associated credits, so earned income tax credit dependence issues, and maximizing refunds, which allows you to do a lot of returns, and then kind of shuts out, things that are out of scope, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So that's kind of the cost. A lot of returns, a lot of refunds, but a narrower pool, I'd say, of expertise, and ultimately who you actually can help. How I've seen VITA organizations respond to this, because nobody wants to be like a Band-Aid help. They want to help something deeper. And what I've seen a lot of VITA organizations do is really expand kind of this refund focus. Some call it like a money moment, where it's really expanding a lot of time financial services, getting the unbanked into mainstream banking, credit reports, all that great stuff. It's not the tax return, frankly, but it's helping with refund moments, which is extremely helpful. I'm not trying to downplay that. That is great. You also see some kind of ancillary things with just people being there with kind of this Form 1040, which is more or less becoming like an all-purpose government form. You'll see some organizations working with voter registration. I know there was a pilot program with that. I'm not actually positive what's still going on there, but some people from Brookings have been working on that. Other things that I've seen in the current state, this I don't think will ever change, but it's a reality that I think needs to be kind of thought about when we think about what can we do as a future state, or what can we do within the realm of possibility, is the vastly different institutional capacities I see for VITA organizations. I crudely break it into really two different classes of VITA organizations. You've got VITA Plus organizations that have staff members that are there year-round, and they focus on all sorts of things. Pretty much everything we talked about today, I would call a VITA Plus organization, and they're doing amazing work and it takes a lot of staff resources and things like that. And then you have the other side, I would call kind of the VITA pop-up community organizations. A lot of times, particularly where I am in Minnesota, you'll see this kind of more rural, or we call it greater Minnesota, where you have an organization that during tax time will do VITA, but after that, it's not open anymore. They don't really have the same staff capacity to do a lot of this stuff. So I've seen kind of a divergence there as well. And I don't know how or if that should be changed, but I think it's worth bringing up. One thing I do want to touch on before I then go into what I would see as the ideal future state, although again, I really do welcome comments on what other people would see or envision as kind of the movement forward of VITA and LITC. But I do think it's worthwhile to also mention what concerns there would be with expanding VITA services. So I've kind of said, oh, well, we focus very much on very narrow issues and we cut out other people. And I make it seem like that's bad, maybe just by the tone of my voice or my hand gestures, I don't really know, but there's a connotation there. But there's legitimate concerns that can be raised and should be considered with expanding services. A few that come to mind, and there's probably more. One of the biggest ones I hear is liability for volunteers if they're going beyond, frankly, what we should expect of them. And this gets to institutional capacity and a lot of other things. A lot of VITA organizations that I've been with rely pretty heavily on students to do work, volunteer sometimes for class credit. That's not to say they can't do anything, but they might not have the expertise or the knowledge to really go beyond a pretty narrow training. There are volunteer protection laws that I'm paraphrasing here, basically say if you only do what's within scope, you're protected. But if you go beyond that, well, there's a concern. And if the IRS just expands the scope, well, then the concern is, aren't we just opening up more potential errors? Susan mentioned how great, I think it was like 96% accuracy, something along those lines. So very accurate general returns. Are we potentially going to water that down, or that be an issue? And I also think, and this one is critical, the harder the return you do, the more time it takes, frequently. And this is, again, something I see different organizations. I think it's just capacity building. A lot of organizations are just first come, first serve. We open up on a day and whoever shows up, that's who we do the returns for. And it's really hard to plan and to actually work with that if you have this wide range of how difficult the return could be. Somehow, even with what I consider very limited scope, you will get very difficult returns kind of no matter what. But I think you might be opening the door even more, or the argument would be, if you're doing that. Some organizations, one I volunteer at, is lucky enough, I would say, to be staffed to the point where it actually has appointments so they can ask about these issues in advance. And I think that's really helpful because you can set aside a little more time for them. But recognizing that not every organization can do that is a concern that would have to be wrestled with. Otherwise, I'd just be like, expand everything. But clearly there is, a con to that I think needs to be looked at. Okay. So rapid fire, kind of what I see the current state of VITA. What do I see as the future state? And of course, I'm going to bring in Low Income Taxpayer Clinics, LITCs, as what I see as being a critical part of that. So I went to law school because I wanted to do more with tax, low income. And really, if you're going to do that, it's either going to be government or it's going to be LITC. If you're doing public interest, it's kind of hard. I was lucky enough to get the academic role at an LITC to continue doing that. But what I'd always had an issue with throughout law school and thereafter was I saw VITAs and LITCs as really two sides of the same coin. VITA is the front side. It's tax prep. It's everything at the beginning. LITC is the back side. It's everything that comes after. Letter from the IRS on audit, whatever it might be, you owe money. LITC is the flip end. But a lot of times I feel like it's not two sides of the same coin. It's like one's a penny and one's a nickel, whichever value. They're not the same coin. That's the point I'm trying to make. There's not as much communication as there should be. And my sincere hope, and I think maybe reason for future optimism, is when Congress codified VITA pretty recently, I believe it's a Taxpayer First Act, they put in a little provision that doesn't require, but it suggests that VITAs and LITCs coordinate. So that's Congress saying, let's have y'all talk more together. That's great. I will be candid and say that I haven't actually seen any coordinated actions that I've been impressed with, at least from the IRS, to actually make that communication happen. That's a little bit of what that might not be giving enough credit to the IRS, but frankly, I just have not been party to that, I guess I'd say. And I think there is, there needs to be a push on it. I don't see why there isn't more coordinated communication there. So what do I see as kind of the vision or the future state of VITA? What can it do with LITCs? Well, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I see VITA and LITCs working together really to advance the state of low income tax law and knowledge. My views on what the future of VITA, what the future of low income tax looks, changes and it morphs over time. But one of the biggest things I've been focusing on and writing on recently is having more low income voices as part of the process for Treasury guidance, IRS guidance, for just fundamental administrative decisions. It'd be great also if you had it in Congress. There's not a ton of low income taxpayer clinic that I know of lobbying. And you will have anti-tax, so to speak, lobbying, but they're not talking about, in my opinion, low income tax issues like credit delivery. So I really do see VITA and LITCs as being that voice and having that network. And how does that work? Well, I see VITA, frankly, as the eyes and ears of low income tax issues. VITA interacts with an order of magnitude more low income taxpayers than LITCs do. LITCs, I'll use mine as an example, but it's very different from place to place. We help roughly 100 to 120 people a year, which I actually think is pretty good for an LITC. And number-wise, you can look at it. I don't think that's that far out of bounds with other LITCs. The VITA organization that I volunteer with does something in the range of 16,000 returns. That's just one organization. There's others that do it. VITA just interacts with more people. And I think they get to see on a ground level and at an earlier stage what low-income people are dealing with in kind of very nitty-gritty things. And I'll give one concrete example that I think every VITA organization can speak to, and that LITCs, I think now increasingly are aware of, but they wouldn't necessarily be aware of if not for VITA. I think every VITA organization has dealt with I've come in to electronically file my return, and it won't go through because my deadbeat, sorry, usually ex-husband or guy, claimed the dependent that they shouldn't, and the return gets rejected. And it's this e-file rejection issue. I think VITA organizations, when I was there, dealt with that all the time. They have their own processes. And it just seems kind of crazy from an administrative perspective that the race to the e-file button determines who can file electronically. And the IRS would say, well, there's technology issues or whatever. But VITA sees this. I think making LITCs aware of it, where I see the LITCs coming in, is as the litigator and frankly as the advocate. You don't always want to jump to litigating, but that's kind of my, I don't know, I guess that's my bias, but you don't necessarily need to do the advocate, and then if all else fails, litigate. But one example of how this particular issue, this race to the e-file button, I think could really benefit from kind of the lawyer perspective, is there are court cases out there that basically say, well, there is a very important precedential court case called Fowler that basically says, if you filed a return, you click e-file or whatever, and it rejects on the back end from the IRS, but the return passes what's called the Beard test, which is a very, frankly, low bar. So it passes 4 different elements, and they're going to be met in this case. It is considered a filed tax return. Whether the IRS processes it or not is a different question. It is considered a filed tax return. To me, this issue of, well, the IRS just isn't processing this, and then you have to send in the paper return, is them kind of ignoring a precedential decision that could push them further, that I think an LITC is situated to do with lawyers, that a VITA organization probably isn't, just as a capacity matter. And it's one thing that VITAs would see that LITCs could help with. I'll give one more example of where I kind of see the eyes and ears and the LITC taking another step. I don't know how many people here on this call have heard of Medicaid waiver payments. I had not heard of them a ton. And then I was volunteering at the time I was in Boston, and I would see people get these Medicaid waiver payments and they wouldn't be able to include it as income because the IRS had a notice that said, oh, it's not considered earned income, you blah, 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 all this stuff. And to me, it was just kind of a curiosity at that point in time. Then I got a case referred to me actually by the US tax court where the question was, should this Medicaid waiver payment be treated as earned income for the earned income credit? So it was on a W-2 like any other job, but it was excluded from income because the IRS said, well, it's Medicaid waiver payment, it's excluded from income. The VITA organization that I reached out to, I said, how many of these are you really seeing? And they didn't give me an exact number, but they said, actually, frankly, a lot. And my second question was, well, what are the income levels? Usually, is it something where they would benefit from it being earned income, or is it better that it's an exclusion? So let me give you a quick example here. If I'm getting a huge Medicaid waiver payment, huge meaning like $50,000, it is more beneficial to me from a tax perspective, almost definitely, to exclude it from income, because I'm probably not going to get an EITC, or if I do it, it's going to be very small. If I'm getting a Medicaid waiver payment of $17,000 and it's my only income, the exclusion gets me nothing. Tax value is basically $0. The EITC is huge if I have kids. And what I had heard was they're actually seeing a fair amount of these like $10,000 to $25,000 band Medicaid waiver payments. We litigated the issue when the court found in our favor that it could be treated as earned income, and the IRS changed their policies. But frankly, I was really unaware of what the issue was until VITA organizations, which have just access to more clients, were able to talk to me. So I think just the coordination there, the eyes and the ears, and the VITA giving insights on what they're seeing, they know better than I do because they're seeing more returns. The other kind of future state that I see for LITC/VITA is more holistic services for low-income taxpayers. I talked about how it's a lot of focus on refunds. Collection is another huge issue that low-income individuals face. In fact, if you look at LITCs, the bulk of the cases they tend to deal with are not audits. It's usually, I owe and I can't afford to pay. And I don't feel, in my opinion, and I'm open to others on here, that VITA has ever done a great job in training on what collection alternatives are. Now, VITA organizations, again, this is capacity. I don't think they need to be put in the place of helping with an offer compromise, but they need to know what options exist so that they can better inform clients on what they can do and when an LITC can step in. So I really see VITA as giving more resources to the organization to holistically help people. The worst thing when you're volunteering is to just tell somebody, look, I can't help you, and I don't know who can. That is the feeling that we all want to get away from. All right, I'm running low on time, so I'm going to try to get to concrete steps where I think we can get actual steps forward. Because to me, the biggest one, frankly, is IRS buy-in. So IRS runs these programs, so to speak. What I think some concrete steps are that they could take would be more training modules. They can be optional. You've got the health savings account module, you've got collection of debt, but that way you can have some people opt into things where, if you have a cancellation of debt expertise, you can deal with, they should expand it. I think cancellation of debt is a great example. Let's say that they expanded the cancellation of debt module to say, if you're insolvent, we can still do your tax return if you complete this module. That's great, because that is most low-income taxpayers that I've dealt with. So instead of going through the entire return, finding out they're insolvent and saying, we can't help you, you're not going to be taxed on this, but we can't help you, we can't do it. It would be, now you have somebody there that actually can. So modules, I think, is one easy way the IRS could do it. I think the IRS could increase emphasis on collection alternatives and more training there. What I would really like to see is IRS include more LITC reference on intake material. Right now, I'd like to see just complete overhaul to reference of the intake material. The 1342, whatever it is form, it's like 100 questions. And every time I look at it, it's a checkbox yes for wages and a check no, just a straight line through basically everything else. The very back end of it, it says something along the lines of, have you got a letter from the IRS? I actually lobbied the IRS to put that on there years ago. And so it's like my one success. I don't know if they listen to me. They might have just done it anyway, but I'm going to take credit. But that's buried. I do think that they could just really change that to try to focus on seeing taxpayers where they are. And not burying them with questions. I get what they're trying to get at. And then one other LA or IRS thing I'd like to see is just pilot programs. If they're concerned about these things, do some more pilot programs with, Schedule C returns that we're seeing more of. I think the 1099K issues we're going to see in the future could be a big problem. I'm speed talking because I literally have a few minutes and I want to give non-IRS requests too. Okay, so if the IRS doesn't do this, what can we as VITA and LITCs do? I think we need to be better at getting LITs and VITA in the same room for nationwide events. VITACon, apparently I've never been to, but I will be coming up. That is a VITA organization or VITA event nationwide. LITCs, I think, could do a better job of being there. I'm not really blaming LITCs. We don't just have a ton of time, but we could do more coordination there. I think the biggest thing is really just LITCs and VITA getting to know each other on a personal basis in your community, and then streamlining referrals and intake that way. A lot of VITA sites have their own little intake form in addition to the IRS one. And if you just have something there that refers to the LITC, that could be huge. So I'm going to stop because I talk fast, but also because I'm out of time, and say, if nothing else, if the IRS doesn't, take the steps I think they need to, VITAs and LITCs, we're in this room together right now. That's great. That's a first step. I think we can take some more after that.
All right, thank you, Caleb. That was quite a list of things that you've observed and things that you would like to see. I've been taking notes. I imagine others have as well. So we'll meet again and pursue expanding out that list. We have like 1 minute left. I don't know, Nina, if you're available to talk just very briefly about LITC Connect as a way to sort of tie the loose ends together here.
Well, thank you, Susan. So one of the things that the Center for Taxpayer Rights has done as part of our our project, the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic Support Center, has created what I call a dating app for LITCs, but we're opening it up to VITA sites and non-governmental organizations who have cases but that need volunteer attorneys. And this may be particularly important for organizations in rural areas or smaller communities, where you can create a profile on LITC Connect, and you can then submit assistance requests where you describe the issue. Don't give us taxpayer information, but you describe the issue. And we have volunteer attorneys, CPAs, enrolled agents from all over the United States that may be able to help. And so we'll put in the chat the website for LITC Connect, and you can learn more about it. And you can also reach out to us at the Center for Taxpayer Rights to learn more about it. And we can also give you a demonstration. We're working with VITAs in a pilot capacity and NGOs. So if you would like to be part of that pilot, then certainly reach out to us. And that's what I've got to say.
Thank you. We've reached the end of our time, which is unfortunate. I had prepared a number of comments and questions that I thought we could discuss, but maybe we'll come back and have a part 2 at some point. And I appreciate the time you spent with us today. You gave us a lot to think about. I thank all of our speakers and also all the people who put comments in the chat. So thank you and have a great rest of the day.